Well, welcome back to another edition of Know the Foe. I'm Andrew Hutchinson, the managing editor of HawgBeat.com, your Arkansas site and the Rivals Network. After more than a month off, the Hogs are back in action this weekend, taking on Penn State in the Outback Bowl down in Tampa. That means it's time once again to go behind enemy lines for some insider perspective on the upcoming game. Clay Sauertieg covers the Nittany Lions for NittanyNation.com, the Penn State Rivals site, and was kind enough to give us some time today. Clay, I appreciate it. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. We are currently getting quite the downpour of snow in central Pennsylvania as we speak. Talking to you here the day after Christmas on December 26th, so we're about 5, 6 days out from the game, but otherwise can't complain.
Well, I won't bother you with how wonderful the weather is here in Arkansas, 60, 70 degrees. But aside from that, so down here in SEC country, I know many of our readers haven't really closely followed the Big Ten. So we'll kind of start off with a broad question. Could you kind of sum up the Penn State season this year, and did it exceed or come up short of expectations for 2021?
It was really a tale of two seasons. Obviously, they started 5-0, headed to Iowa City, ranked number 3 in the country. Halfway through that game, for anybody who saw that game, we're up, I believe it was 17-3 or 21-3. Sean Clifford goes down, that falls apart. And that's really where Penn State's season fell apart. They finished the year 2-5, I think, over their last 7 games, 7-5 overall. A number of close games. Probably should have beaten Michigan after going up late. Had a chance to beat Michigan State. Had a really, really embarrassing loss in there to Illinois. On its whole, you're probably about 5-10 points from being 9-3, and the season that probably most people would have projected. But in the end, I think it would probably have to be classed as a bit of a disappointment. Injuries, obviously, a big deal in there. We mentioned Clifford was hurt. Senior defensive captain PJ Mustipher was lost for the year in that Iowa game as well. Starting defensive tackle. Had some injuries elsewhere that didn't help the cause, but ultimately they just didn't make enough plays in situations where they needed to.
And now diving kind of into the Outback Bowl, I know that the two linebackers, Ellis Brooks and Brandon Smith, they've officially opted out. There might be a few others that aren't going to be available for Penn State. What do you anticipate on that front, and how do you think Penn State will be able to replace those guys who do opt out?
It's going to be very interesting. You mentioned Brooks and Smith already opted out. As of our last reporting on site, Jahan Dotson was not with the team, which is a big one. Arnold Ebiketie at defensive end also did not travel with the team, nor did All-American safety Jaquan Brisker. So that's a pretty significant group of losses right there. You're going to see a lot of young players. I think at the safety position, replacing Brisker or his production individually is going to be difficult. But true freshman Jalen Reed has had an outstanding season. Keaton Ellis, is a third-year player, has had an outstanding season. I think they should be fine on the back end. Linebacker depth is going to be tough. You had a pair of true freshmen in Kobe King and Jamari Button who played throughout the season, but they would like to retain their redshirt status and played 4 games already. So you're going to be looking at guys like Tyler Elsdon or Charlie Katcher who are a little further down the line. Defensive end is going to be pretty difficult going into the season. One of the projected starters was Disa Isaac. He was lost for the year before the year even started. And now Ebiketie is out. You'll probably see linebacker Jesse Luketa take some snaps with his hand in the ground on third down. So you're going to be pretty thin defensively. It's going to be quite the task for Anthony Poindexter, who's also filling in for Brent Pry, who has since left for the head coaching job at Virginia Tech. So there will be opportunities. On the other side of the ball, obviously, anytime you replace a first-round projected pick in Jahan Dotson, it's going to be tough. But Penn State has some athletes there. Wide receiver Parker Washington's had an outstanding first 2 seasons. Keandre Lambert-Smith has come into his own. Malik Mega is a redshirt freshman who really seems to just be kind of scratching the surface of his potential the last few games. I don't think offensive production is going to be too much of a big deal. They have some weapons. As long as the offensive line can hold up, but really they're going to be really, really thin in the front 7 on defense.
And I was going to ask you about Sean Clifford. You mentioned him earlier, got hurt, banged up earlier in the season. Looks like he threw for nearly 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, 6 picks, but I know stats don't tell us everything. What does he do well, and where does he maybe struggle, and what kind of quarterback is he?
Clifford's interesting because he's a good enough quarterback to get you in a position where 2 years ago he was leading a team that was 11-2 in the Cotton Bowl. Whether he's good enough to get you over that threshold, we've yet to see. He's had some really, really bad down moments. His 2021 season was really tough. He's now on his fourth offensive coordinator, going from Joe Moorhead to Ricky Ronnie to Kirk Shiraka for a year, and now Mike Yurcich. He started off the season very well before being injured. After being injured, understandably struggled a bit. His pocket presence is not the best, and his accuracy lacks at times. But when he is confident, when he can step into throws, he can make some really impressive throws. He's a lot better runner than I think a lot of people give him credit for. He's really good at improvising and making plays kind of on the run. But it's Penn State's in a very, very weird spot where him coming back next year is obviously an asset. Otherwise, they would have had only really freshmen in the quarterback room. But he's not the type of quarterback that's going to put you over the top in terms of taking that next step.
And looking over the stats, I was very surprised to see that the Nittany Lions were near the bottom in the country in rushing. Well, how is that? And did that surprise you, or was that something kind of y'all knew going into the year that was going to be a point of struggle?
There were some questions around the offensive line going into the year. They brought in the Harvard transfer Eric Wilson, who was starting at guard. They had a new center in Mike Miranda, who moved over from guard. Juice Scruggs, who was highly recruited and chose Penn State over Ohio State and Notre Dame, among others, suffered a very, very significant back injury, has been coming back. Ultimately, they just didn't get enough push, particularly in the interior. The two guards in the center did not play strongly enough. They didn't move people off the ball. They weren't physical enough. Rasheed Walker took what I would call a step back at left tackle. Right tackle, Caden Wallace was highly recruited, a Rivals 100 guy, but probably better suited for guard down the line. The physicality just wasn't there. Then the running backs, I would say, didn't do them a ton of favors. You had John Lovett coming over from Baylor, who was a big transfer and really didn't get things going. Noah Kane had a fantastic freshman year a few years ago, and since has had injury problems, which have really, really slowed his progress. Kevon Lee was a big time back out of high school, a Rivals 250 kid who can be very physical, but at 6'1", 6'2", 230, 240, probably doesn't run as physical as he should and runs a bit upright and tries to dance a bit too much. So it was a mix of things. I think the offensive line didn't move enough people out of the way, and the running backs didn't do them favors when they did.
And moving over to the other side of the ball, how would you characterize Penn State's defensive scheme? And does anything change? You mentioned Brent Pry leaving to go to Virginia Tech as the head coach. Does anything change with that coaching change?
I don't think you'll see any market changes. Obviously, the big thing was Manny Diaz coming in. He will not coach the bowl game, obviously. Anthony Poindexter was the co-defensive coordinator and safeties coach, is going to take over that duty. On the back end, very long, very athletic, even without Brisker. At linebacker, they had some very athletic linebackers in Brandon Smith, Ellis Brooks calling things in the middle. Arnold Ebiketie was a transfer from Temple who had a fantastic year and is now probably, I would think, a day 2 NFL draft pick somewhere in that second, third round range. But they're going to be thin. Ebiketie was really their only elite pass rusher. Lucetta had some great plays there, but he's going to be mostly playing linebacker in the bowl game. I see you're probably going to see a lot of bend but don't break, a good amount of blitzing. It's going to be interesting to see how much time Arkansas has to throw the ball. If they have time, it's going to be tough on the back end, even though I think Penn State's corners and safeties are very talented. There's only so long you can hold up. A very turnover-driven team. They were in the top half of the Big Ten, top 25% of the country in terms of turnover margin. Ball hawking on the back end. Jair Brown had, I believe, 5 or 6 turnovers from the safety position, and he's going to really step into that leadership role in place of Brisker. So it's going to be interesting. A really, really talented red zone defense, a lot of length, a lot of speed. But if the game's going to be won, the defense is really going to have to step up, and some kids who weren't playing a lot are going to have to step into those roles.
And kind of along those same lines, with all those defensive guys that are not going to be available, and those are some really key players. how would you attack if you were an offensive coordinator going into this, Outback Bowl? How would you personally try to attack this defense? Is there any specific areas that you think you could exploit, that Arkansas could exploit, that would benefit them?
Yeah, I gotta think both in the run game and in the pass game, the middle of the field is going to be tough. Curtis Jacobs is one of the returning linebackers. Had a fantastic sophomore season. Was a top 50 recruit and a really, really athletic player at linebacker. But otherwise, you're talking about guys mixed in there. He and Luquetta are not going to play every snap, so it's going to make things tough. Whether that's tight ends down the seam, attacking where Brisker would have been, whether that's running counter or a lot of pre-snap motion to get linebackers looking in different directions. I gotta say, attacking the middle of the field is going to be a big one, particularly with PJ Mustipher being out, Arnold Ebiketie being out. Derek Tangelo was one that we're not really sure of the status at defensive tackle. Transfer from Duke, who had a pretty good year, and I would probably have a 5th or 6th round grade on the draft. So the middle of the field is really an area where I think that Arkansas could really succeed.
And finally, I'll wrap it up with this. Penn State, I think, open as like a 4-point favorite. Seems to be a lot closer now. The last time I checked, I think even some places maybe even have it as a pick 'em. You don't necessarily have to give a prediction here, but I'm curious how you kind of see this game playing out.
I was one of the rare few that liked the Hogs even before all the opt-outs. Now there was a little bit of inkling that the players wouldn't play, and I'm sure that was the case on your end as well, in terms of having a feeling that certain guys would or wouldn't at this point. Um, I think right now I like Arkansas. I still think it'll be close. I think there's an element of pride there that they won't let Penn State get blown out. But I could see something in the 30-24, 30-27 range there.
Well, that's all I have for you, Clay. Thanks again for giving us some great insight on the Nittany Lions. And as a reminder to everyone listening, that kickoff is scheduled for 11 a.m. Central on Saturday, New Year's Day, and the game will be televised on ESPN2. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can always see these Know the Foe interviews, as well as press conferences, practice clips, recruiting videos, and much more. And as always, be sure to check out HawgBeat.com for our coverage of all things Arkansas.